Lesson 14, Part 2, Voice in Greek. Greek is a little different than English when it comes to voices because Greek has 3 voices: active, middle, and passive. Active and passive are exactly like the English ones, but some actions are considered middle voice. In the middle voice, the subject is doing something for itself or is acting on itself. In some languages like Spanish, this is called reflexive and is not considered to be a voice. But for Greek, it is a separate voice. Consider these examples. I am hitting the ball. That's active. The ball is being hit by me. That's passive. I am dressing myself. In English, this is active. In Greek, this is middle. Now, in English, we have to have this extra pronoun here at the end. That's our direct object. I am dressing who? I am dressing myself. But in Greek, you would not need to supply an extra pronoun. It would be contained in the verb itself, in the voice of the verb. In Spanish, we have me visto, which means I am dressing myself. And this is reflexive in Spanish. Those of you who know Spanish, you'll see it has this reflexive pronoun at the beginning. It's not a voice. It is an active voice verb in Spanish, but it has a reflexive pronoun. In Greek, this is going to be the middle. Now, for the present tense in Greek, the middle and passive forms of the verb are identical. They look the same. They have different meanings, but they look the same. Now, this won't be the case in some other tenses, though. When we get to the future tense in Greek too, you'll find out that in the future tense, the future middle indicative and the future passive indicative look different. They have different forms. But for the present tense, the present middle indicative and the present passive indicative look exactly the same. Here is the PMI, which is also the PPI. So it's the present middle indicative and the present passive indicative. We have sodzomai, sodze, sodzetai, sodzometha, sodzeste, sodzontai. Now, if we take a look at this, there are some things that are slightly similar to what we would expect and some things that are brand new. So take a moment and see what observations you can make. You can pause the video if you like to take a few extra seconds. All right, the first thing that I notice is over here in the first person plural, we're used to seeing amen, but now we have ametha. So the first 3 letters of that ending are the same, but then we get a tha instead of the new. The second thing I notice is this esthe. We're used to seeing ete here, but now we've got a sigma and a theta. These 2 thetas together can sort of help us remember that we've got a middle passive form, because that's going to be a very common occurrence in all of the middle passives. We've mentioned before primary A and secondary A endings. These are technically the primary B endings. The secondary B endings are actually going to be exactly identical for the first person plural and the second person plural. They won't for the other 4 forms, but they will be identical here. So those are some really good clues that you've got B endings and you're in the middle passive forms. Now let's look at the rest of what we've got. Amai, that looks totally different from the O ending. We're just gonna have to learn that one. Oh, there's an iota subscript here. We are used to seeing an iota in this position, but we're also used to seeing a sigma on the end. So that's going to be very, very different. Now, I will have to warn you, there are some exceptions that occasionally show up in this position. Sometimes you'll see psi, sigma, alpha, iota. So that is something that does actually end up with some exceptions quite frequently. What actually In all technicality, what happens here is the ending is actually psi, but there's an epsilon in front of it. When there's a sigma between two vowels, when you've got an ending like this going on, the sigma will drop out and those vowels will all blend together. So the epsilon and the I blended together and became this eta with an iota subscript. So that's what we're going to see the most frequently, but we will occasionally see something else that's a little bit different. Then down here, we've got etai and ontai. You'll remember we had an on form in this position for the imperfect active indicative, the secondary A endings. So that might help a little bit. And then these ties, we have the ties in the third person. So etai, third person singular, ontai, third person plural. And that's actually going to tie fairly similarly to our secondary B endings that we'll learn soon. We'll point out those similarities, but when we get there, but those are what we have. So we have amai, a, etai, ametha, este, ontai. Those are our primary B endings that we're using for the present middle indicative and the present passive indicative. So here is what these words would mean in the middle. Sodzamai, I am saving for myself, or almost like I'm saving myself. But it could be I'm saving something else or someone else for, for my behalf to better myself. Sodze, you are saving for yourself. Sodzetai, he is saving for himself. Sodzametha, we are saving for ourselves. Sodzeste, ye are saving for yourselves. And sodzantai, they are saving for themselves. Now here is what these words would mean in the passive. Sodzamai, I am being saved. Sodze, you are being saved. Sodzetai, he is being saved. Sodamatha, we are being saved. Sodzeste, ye are being saved. And sodzantai, they are being saved. Now you'll notice here, the I am saving at the beginning of the middle form, or the you are saving, or the he is saving, that's exactly identical to the active voice, how we've already been translating our verbs. We just need to add the for whoever, for myself, for yourself, for himself, or herself, or itself, for ourselves, for yourselves, and for themselves. Now you'll notice all the plurals have a selves. All the singulars have a self. I can sort of help you out there. Also note, it's not their selves, it's themselves. And it's not his self, it's himself. Got to make sure we have proper grammar here. When we come across into the passives, that's that form of be for the progressive with a form of ing. That's all for the progressive. Then we have another form of be to make it passive with the past participle to make it passive. So am being blanked, are being blanked, is being blanked. Those are the forms we're going to use. Now, in the present tense, you will have to tell if a verb is middle or passive by looking at the context and using logic. If you're parsing it, you'll say that it's both. But if you're actually trying to translate something in an actual sentence, it has to be one or the other, so you're going to need to pick one. Most of the time, the verb will be passive. Middle voice verbs are pretty rare. There are very, very few of them that actually show up in the New Testament in a truly middle form. Almost all the time, it's going to be passive. So if you're in a translation, try the passive voice first. If that doesn't work, then maybe try middle, but almost always it's going to be passive. Now, some verbs just can't be passive. Consider how ludicrous these would be. He was being come. It was being gone. Then there are some verbs that just don't make sense in the passive for a first or second person, which are always people, but they do make sense in the third person when an object is the subject. So I was being gone into doesn't make any sense, but the house was being gone into, that sort of does make sense. You were being prayed doesn't make any sense, but the prayer was being prayed. That does make sense. So occasionally you may run into one or two of these where you're trying to parse them where they just sound a little bit funny, but in a proper context, in a real sentence, they would actually make sense. Summary. Memorize the forms of the present middle passive indicative. In the active voice, the subject is doing the action. In the passive voice, the subject is being acted on or receiving the action. In the middle voice, the subject is doing something for itself or acting on itself.